A major part of the success behind the Kingdom Come Deliverance games, including the sequel from earlier this year, can be attributed to the fact that the games have taken a realistic approach to their open-world European medieval gameplay and settings. Along with intense swordplay and role-playing, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 focuses on providing a relatively realistic approach to its crafting systems. The latest DLC release, Legacy of the Forge, focuses largely on one of these systems, namely blacksmithing.
It served me for many years, even after he died. Only now it's all worn down and crooked, so it's not good for chopping.
Why didn't you get a new one in all those years? Someone from the guild would surely be happy to make you one. Probably for free.
I don't need their charity. Besides, if you're even half as talented as your pa was, this should be child's play to you, no?
Of course.
But this is far from a large-scale DLC. In fact, it is quite tiny when compared to the rest of the base game. However, rather than being a weakness, this actually serves as its major strength, since its narrow scope does quite a bit to give it a sense of focus. The premise behind the DLC is quite simple. While going about his day in Kuttenberg, protagonist Henry spots a dilapidated building that prompts some long-forgotten memories. These memories revolve around his father, Martin, and his life as a blacksmith. On learning more about the building, Henry decides to take it upon himself to try and fulfill his late father's long-abandoned mission, to get it back to its former glory as a forge, and to use his skills at crafting to repair the Kuttenberg astronomical clock. However, it is worth noting that this isn't the only skill of Henry's that will be tested. Things start off with a surprisingly challenging opening quest that has you pore through a blacksmithing book, and prove your mastery by forging an acceptable sword to become a member of the blacksmithing guild. Once you finally gain membership, the guild allows you to take on ownership of the long-abandoned building, which, at this point, is too expensive to fix up for the guild. Henry must then join forces with the widow of the blacksmith under whom his own father apprenticed to get the forge running and the business going. Even after you've successfully cleaned out the building and set up the forge, there's still a surprising amount of content to explore in Legacy of the Forge.
We'll see what he can do shortly. Just to be clear, let me repeat what the trial entails. In the first part, the verbal examination, he will receive 3 questions. He must answer all 3 of them correctly in order to pass. If he makes a single mistake, this part of the exam is considered failed, and he won't get a chance to correct himself. After the verbal examination comes the practical one, where our adept skills will be tested.
The core story requires you to climb up the ranks of the blacksmithing guild, which in turn requires you to take on a variety of quests to get your fellow guild members to like you. Not everything in the story revolves around crafting, ultimately. Since you now have your very own forge, crafting obviously takes center stage here, and you are going to spend most of your time running around Kuttenberg and its surrounding areas in search for materials as you craft different things to fulfill guild orders, as well as to sell to other people in order to make a tidy profit. Access to this forge makes crafting much simpler, and you can easily start up essentially the DLC's quest as soon as you get to Kuttenberg and have around 400 groschen. Legacy of the Forge also makes a lot of sense to get started as early as possible in the game, since the new crafting recipes you get from the DLC tend to be quite lucrative, and it ends up being a great story to continue alongside your other pursuits throughout Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. As for the story itself, it's rather small scale in nature, with the end goal being to team up with Martin's old friends to ultimately fix up the long-dormant clock. Progressing through the ranks of the blacksmithing guild is largely about building relationships with its members, while also taking on special guild commissions that put your smithing skills to the test.
Well, this definitely isn't your best work, but no matter. Even a master makes mistakes, eh? You can take that shoddy thing with you. Do you want to repeat the trial?
In practice, the guild functions more as a progression system, while the main story of the DLC centers on your efforts to repair the Great Clock. That said, the story itself never grows much more complex than this. What keeps it engaging are the new characters, who are all thoughtfully written with distinct quirks and personalities. A particular highlight is meeting Martin's old friends, as these encounters provide deeper insight into who he was as a person and why he was so determined to restore the astronomical clock. Since you get a whole building to set up your new forge business in, there's also a fair bit of customization available in the DLC. As you gain higher ranks in the guild, you also start unlocking new options for decorating your workshop. These decorations range from simple ones like nicer looking walls or a more lavish bed to rest in, to more complex options like swapping out entire pieces of furniture, fixing up the outer walls, and even ultimately repairing the collapsed roof of the building. Along with this, players more interested in combat will also be happy to know that the DLC brings with it a new set of powerful weapons that players can craft as soon as they can get their hands on the blueprints. These weapons can also be sold for a decent amount of groschen if you're more interested in lining your pockets than chasing the slight numerical upgrades that they provide over your existing gear.
Haven't you got something to forge? Clear off!
One of the DLC's biggest shortcomings is the lack of genuinely interesting new equipment to craft. Most of the new weapon recipes amount to little more than incremental stat boosts compared to what you might already own. But on the flip side, this also means Legacy of the Forge never feels essential or even mandatory to pick up. To its credit, the DLC does at least flesh out some of the weaker weapon categories by adding more variety to blunt weapons and polearms, which helps broaden your options in those areas. But a major downside of Legacy of the Forge is that since it is essentially a standalone story, it doesn't really involve any of the other characters from the base game. At no point will the characters from the DLC acknowledge the presence of Teresa, Capone, or Catherine, for example, despite the Devil's Den being quite close to Kuttenberg. This narrower scope might end up making the DLC feel a bit superficial to some players, but I would argue that it expands on more of the enjoyable side activities with things like additional quests and narrative content. All of that said, Legacy of the Forge can feel tedious to players that don't really care about the crafting systems in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and are instead more interested in the excellent combat and intense storytelling. Since crafting in the game largely involves running around to various vendors to get your hands on as many materials as you can before you get to work on making dozens of swords, axes, and hammers, it may start to feel sort of like a chore here. However, if you do care about crafting, it's handled in the game, you're sure to enjoy Legacy of the Forge as well. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 Legacy of the Forge might not be a grand new adventure in the life of Henry. It is, however, a great way to spend time between more intense bouts of combat or long quest chains.
I'll give it another try.
Very well.
Here it is.
Good luck.
You get your own house to chill in, and you get to make quite a bit of extra cash by simply partaking in the DLC storyline and making use of the titular forge to craft things. So, what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and share them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. We upload every day and would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.